Good day to everyone. I'm Sharan and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of Beroe, I would like to welcome you all for today's webinar from Beroe Insights. So, in today's webinar, we will have our speaker discuss and also help us understand the evolving practices in construction project tendering approaches with a comparative assessment between the developed and developing economies. So before we move ahead with the presentation, I have some general set of instructions as always. Please note all attendees will be placed on mute. During the course of the presentation, if you would like to post a question, you will find a box on the right-hand side indicated in red. I request you to type your questions and hit the send button. And as the presentation progresses, I will ensure to take a note of the high-frequency questions and will post it to the presenter at end of the session. If you're experiencing any connection issues with this webinar, I request you to close the window, go back to the email and try connecting using the link that was provided in the invitation. If you further face problems in connecting to the webinar, I request you to quickly drop an email to Puneet at puneet.ramal@beroe-inc.com, which you will find in the invitation that you received from us. Moving on, let me quickly introduce the speaker for today's webinar, Raj Manohar. He's an engineering and construction expert at Beroe Inc. He specializes in providing capital construction-related procurement intelligence to Fortune 500 companies. Raj has built extensive knowledge and expertise in categories including global as well as emerging market constructions in the end-user markets across industries. He's written and published several thought leadership papers in leading global and Indian construction magazines. To name some of the topics, which include India, labor and material trends, and changing state of construction equipment industry. So without further ado, let me pass it on to the presenter who will take you through to today's webinar.
Thank you, Sharan. Good day to everyone. Globalization and the need to utilize the benefits of growing economies has resulted in organizations and companies shifting their focus towards developing and best sourcing destinations. This drives the need to establish the required infrastructure in terms of their buildings, offices, and facilities in the market or country that they plan to enter. The major challenge arises with selection, tendering, and bidding of building contractors. Often, companies are unable to see through deep into the intricacies of this entire process, which does not have a significant impact on the overall completion of the project. So, in today's webinar, I will try to throw some light on some of the dynamics of the tendering process and the possible gray areas that exist. I will also try to discuss how similar or different the process is between developed as well as the developing countries. So, for our presentation today, first, I would like to focus on the key criteria for a contractor selection process, following which I will discuss the process of tendering in developing economies in comparison to the developed markets. Here, I will also try to focus on what one should keep in mind during a bidding process in the developing markets. Next, I will discuss some of the key issues that arise post the tendering process. And finally, I would also discuss if there are possibilities to mitigate these issues as well as the challenges. Before we go into the core of the topic, let us spend a couple of minutes to understand the current situation as well as the issue faced by buyers of construction services globally. The contractor selection process, practice, and formats differ from country to country, mostly between developed to that of developing markets. This indicates that there is an extreme low level of standardization in the entire process of tendering. Lack of standardization results in a couple of serious consequences. First, Disputes are bound to occur if there is a misfit in contractor selection as a result of a lack of standardization in the process. Second, there is a high level of exposure to corruption and fraud in developing markets, which may have a direct impact on cost or quality of the project. During the course of the presentation, we will discuss and understand more on how these consequences can be addressed. But for that, let's quickly understand the key criteria that are important for selection process of a contractor. The main objective of bid evaluation is to determine the best responsive bid in order to select the optimum contractor. A bidding process is carried out either on a competitive or a selective basis. Federal procurement projects usually undertake competitive bidding, and private projects take the two-step selective bidding route. Most Fortune 500 companies undertake a bidding process consisting of a pre-qualification and a contractor selection process. In order to select the best fit contractor, buyers in developed markets generally consider criterion such as financial soundness, health and safety, technical ability, management capability, and reputation. So let's get into detail of each one of these parameters. So financial soundness. It basically refers to factors like financial stability of the company, sound credit rating, banking arrangements, as well as the current financial status of the contractor. Next, health and safety. It includes general safety measures undertaken by the contractor and OSHA incident rate, where OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Next, technical ability. This refers to experience in execution of projects, personnel, and infrastructural facilities. Next is management capability. It reflects the past performance, quality standards, project management, organization of the contractor. And finally, reputation. Profiling the contractors based on their industry experience, past ownerships, and failures is critical. Among these criteria, financial soundness, technical ability, and general reputation are the most crucial in order to select the best contractor. These criterions are also used as standard in the pre-qualification process that private organizations undertake for selective bidding. Equally significant in selecting the right contractor are other parameters such as health and safety and management capability. Industrial projects generally require a weightage split of 43 to 57% between the technical to the financial weightage. Technical weightage, by technical weightage, ability, we mean to say it's constituted by the experience in execution of similar projects along with resources such as personnel, equipment, and facilities. The above mentioned criterion works best for buyers in the developed markets, but are these the discussed criteria sufficient in developing economies also? Absolutely not. Developing economies consist of varying sets of additional contractor evaluation parameters. Let's look at the additional criteria that are fundamental to contractor selection in developing markets like China, India, Vietnam, etc. Developing markets carry the risk of project cost and schedule overrun owing to the unorganized nature of the industry. And hence, in addition to the key criterion discussed earlier for developed markets, there are few other qualitative parameters or criteria that one should evaluate in developing markets. In addition to the high emphasis on the financial criteria, which has the highest weightage for contractor selection in emerging or developing economies, the other important criterions are the first one would be genuineness of work licenses, anti-bribery and corruption policies, health, safety, and environment policies, and quality assurance. Now, let's look into each of these criteria in detail. Genuineness of work licenses, what does this mean? Often contractors have a habit of submitting fake licenses and documents which are not genuinely authenticated, validated, or approved by any other regulatory body. This results in contracting substandard contractors, which further results in poor performance and quality of construction. Next, anti-bribery and corruption policies. Unlike European or American regions, where anti-corruption or anti-bribery legislation is stringent and enforced, developing regions are in very nascent stages on getting regulations in place. However, even though some countries have these policies in place, the major challenge is the enforcement. Always contractors tend to use the loopholes to benefit most out of it. Coming to health, safety and environment. Labor health and safety have not been high priority in developing regions as compared to developed nations. Environment clearances are major hurdles in developing markets, which often lead to project delays in markets like India, Brazil, Vietnam, etc. There have been instances where projects have been built without prior approvals and however face disputes in later stages, resulting in abrupt closure of the project by local bodies. Moving on to quality assurance, the lack of planned and systematic tasks is a primary concern in projects of developing nations. This otherwise ensures that quality is achieved at every milestone of the project. Quality is a major concern in developing markets. This is an issue right from materials, the labor, execution, and all related aspects. There is a constant need to clearly define and monitor quality throughout the project. So now, since we have seen what the additional criteria in developing markets are, I understand your next question would be, will this guarantee a 100% performance in terms of cost and budget? The answer is no. I'm sure you must be wondering, is there a process or can we really achieve the same? But still the answer is again a yes and a no. To understand this better, let me give you the scenario where a different method or process can help achieve better results. What exactly is a reverse tender process or the reverse auction? How does it work in developed markets and is it of use in developing markets? Reverse auction bidding is an alternative contracting method which operates much the same way as a traditional auction. It was born out of the technological advancement in the construction sector in this decade and has been utilized for federal government procurement projects. It has been gaining prominence in most developed markets like US, UK, Germany, etc. First, let's look at how reverse auction works in developed markets and then compare the process in developing markets. Reverse auction is generally conducted online where a project is placed to bid. Contractors try to drive the cost down by continuously lowering their price in order to win the contract. The process ends at the expiry of a given time limit, or else if the lowest bid is achieved before the time limit, the process comes to an end. Reverse auction has been effectively used by private majors such as HP, GE, 3M, and other companies across the globe, and buyers in the US region have reported around savings of 15% using this method. But the question is reverse auction applicable to all kinds of projects? Also, is it feasible in the developing economies or not? So let's move on to the next slide, where we talk about a few examples by the target group of company and as well as GSK, which highlight mixed results of the reverse auction. If you see that target group is considered as a strong proponent of reverse auction. Owing to repetitive nature of the project, Target was able to train pre-qualified suppliers for this process and get the best price for quality service. However, in the case of GSK, which was reaping the benefits of the process earlier, had to withdraw from this approach. The reason behind this was due to the fact that reverse auctions fell in direct violations of federal and state laws governing contracting methods. So, this process is suited for small projects with a focus on commodities like utilities, construction materials, extra, and complex projects like turnkey construction projects cannot practically use this approach. Issues like achieving a false sense of low bid, conflicts among contractor-buyer on liability, and occasional quality issues have kept this approach unpopular these days. Sometimes regional contracting laws come in the way for the usage of this process, like in the case of GSK, which we saw earlier. But with the development of improved IT portals for construction, buyers in the developing markets are showing increased interest in this approach to realize any savings. For example, buyers in the electrical utility sector of countries like India, Hong Kong, etc. are realizing the benefits of this approach for projects less than $1 million mark. Presently, reverse bidding or the reverse auction is restricted to small-scale projects below $1 million, where the specifications are clearly defined upfront with respect to commodities like I mentioned earlier, be it utilities, pumps, electrical, etc. This is also a clear cue for developing nations to benefit from this bidding method as long as there are no legal bans on this approach. But in other cases, where the project spend is really high, about 20 million USD, and the scope is undefined or very nascent, buyers are left with no choice but to fall back on the conventional bidding process. As far as process is concerned for contractor selection, reverse auction or the reverse tendering works well for smaller projects, and conventional bidding is the best option for larger projects. Now, let's see what happens next once the bidding process is completed in the best interest of both parties and what impacts construction schedule and cost. Now, we have managed to select the best fit contractor. Do you think the contractor is doing it right and delivering on time? Not really. There is one other key element which is a major challenge in the developing markets, which is bribery and corruption. Not to say that developed markets do not face bribery or corruption, but the level or degree of impact significantly differs. On a global level, it is to be noted that engineering and construction industry faces the highest exposure to corruption as compared to industries like energy, telecommunications, etc. It is also acknowledged that corruption, fraud in bidding or building is omnipresent. It's an omnipresent phenomenon and coexists in both developed and developing markets. The key issue that impacts project completion in the developing markets is worker productivity, which usually ranges around 85 to 90%, whereas construction worker productivity in developed markets is very high, ranging from 95 to 98%. But the most important difference here is that developing markets are unorganized in nature, and hence its tolerance to corruption is higher as compared to developed markets. Often, this factor is something which goes unnoticed by companies, as the level and degree of corruption or bribery is not exposed, especially in developing markets. In addition, it is always beneficial to understand some of the key issues that one can foresee post-tendering or the bidding process. Let me throw some light on these key issues. Here are the key issues plaguing the building as well as the bidding process in all kinds of markets, generally the developed as well as the developing markets. The key issues occur at two stages: process level and project level. The process level issues include bid contract rigging and bribery and corruption. And issues like billing fraud, change order manipulation, tax avoidance, and theft of materials are restricted on a project level disruption. Let me try to explain at a high level with figures to differentiate process level and project level issues in developed and developing markets. If you look at the first graph on the top right corner, you can see that in Netherlands, the burden of damages through bid rigging is very low as compared to a similar sized economy in Asia, which is Korea. The graph below indicates the fine enforced for bid rigging in these markets. If you notice, the enforcement in terms of the fines for these damages are higher on a relative scale in Netherlands as compared to the Korean economy. The fines that the Korean construction market has witnessed in a single year are humongous as compared to Netherlands, which has incurred lesser fines over a period of 5 years. Administrative enforcement is very nascent in emerging economies like Korea, India, China, etc. Hence, we understand that there is way more room for dilution in most cases in the bidding process with contractors or subcontractors, and hence this is a call for increased due diligence in the process of bidding in developed developing nations. Stringent laws in developed markets help keep bribery and corruption under control. However, it remains a point of key concern in developing markets. So, what exactly do you think is the present condition of developing nations in terms of issues in construction like corruption, bribery, etc.? Let's look at the 2012 Ernst & Young Global Corruption Index for construction. Here we can see that the Western world falls in the clean to very clean category, while the emerging and immature economies across South America to the Asian Pacific regions tend to move very close to the highly corrupt index. Hence, a sense of caution is extremely important for any buyer arranging a tender process for bids across these regions. Now, let's look at some of the examples of a few incidents from the past related to bid rigging and bribery in developing economies that have tarnished the image of the market in these regions. 7 of the top Chinese contractors, including China State Construction Corporation, were barred from bidding for future contracts from 2000 to 2007 for alleged bid rigging for multiple highway projects in the Philippines. Next, 3 top officials of a top Korean nuclear construction company were imprisoned for 6 months for involvement in bid rigging practices in Korea, which is more of a recent news. And Leighton International, a well-known top global contractor based in Australia, was guilty of bribery, corruption, and bid rigging for the last 5 years across multiple Asian regions of Iraq, India, Indonesia, and Malaysia. This led to penalties and a consecutive loss of share prices, resulting in tarnishing the company's reputation. So, these examples show how important it is for buyers to meticulously evaluate the credibility of a contractor. So far, at every stage, both at the process level and in the project level, we observe that it is not possible to put a foolproof system in place. However, the impact can be controlled and mitigated. Throughout the presentation, we discussed the possibilities of a 100% guaranteed tendering process, but the reality lies in understanding the situation and being well prepared to take on challenges. Being a buyer of construction services, one should be aware as to what should be done to ensure that there is a smooth ride over possible issues both at the project as well as the process level. So, looking at the project level, let's look at the few phases that we should undertake. First, you need to strategize. The first and foremost step to be followed is to have a robust corporate governance policy which will ensure to close every possible loophole that might lead to fraud or corruption. In addition, the key is enforcement and making people accountable for the same. Finally, it is very important to develop a monitoring committee which closely works with the board members to ensure visibility and transparency. The next phase is an assessment for corruption and fraud. It is highly important that a company does a thorough fraud and risk assessment in order to lay out stringent guidelines which can be enforced both at the process and at the project level. Further on, companies should ensure that they set up a whistleblower policy in confidence that will help in raising a red flag wherever there is non-compliant activity regarding corruption or fraud. Moving on to the next phase, which is to do with communication. A very important factor that will help a buyer to manage and mitigate the issues is by ensuring constant and continuous flow of communication to all the possible teams involved in the project. This should have a bottom-up and a top-down approach to ensure clear flow of the message, and at the same time, this helps in addressing the issues more effectively and also in a timely manner. Institutionalize training programs to equip the team with knowledge and skills needed to realize these procedures and handle fraud-related problems. Now the final phase, which is to monitor. Finally, all of the above stages can be effectively executed only when we have a robust monitoring system in place, ensure to monitor and assess the effectiveness of fraud countering procedures wherever required on a regular basis. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying that the buyer needs to approach with caution, especially in developing markets, Ensure the required due diligence is carried out at each of these stages so that things are done right at the first time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks for the insightful presentation. I think indeed that was a good insight into what buyers should focus, especially when they differentiate between the developed and the developing economies. This wraps up our presentation, and at this point of time, we do not have much of questions. However, we'll be more than happy to take questions. You could shoot across an email to Puneet, and we will be more than happy to take and provide answers for the same. Thanks once again for joining us in today's presentation. We sign off now until we meet you next time. Thanks once again and have a great day. Bye-bye.